education, and social amenities. We'll be talking about the role of the United Nations in collaboration with member countries in attaining sustainable population growth. My guests are United Nations Population Fund representative, Dr. Julita Onabanjo, and United Nations Economic Advisor, Ois Parry. Welcome to the program.
Thank you, Frank, and thanks for having us.
With the world figure reaching 7 billion people, and in light of the challenges facing the world, such as food insecurity, rising food prices, it all looks like gloom. What do you think society is prepared for the challenges ahead of such a population figure?
Thank you, Frank. Yes, it is challenging. It's sometimes mind-boggling to understand how many zeros are behind the 7 billion number. But I think what's important is 7 billion is about people, and therefore they are definitely an asset in terms of what we can use and how we can turn that around. And so in as much as it is challenging, and we don't underestimate what the complexity of that population is to a world and to the planet we live in, we do see that there are opportunities, and there are great opportunities. The 7th billion person will come into the world on the 31st of October. But I think they come into a world which is actually contradictory in many ways. Because I think and we see that in Tanzania, we're going to celebrate the 50th anniversary. And we see a lot of achievements in terms of development. Clearly, life expectancy has gone up, so people are living longer. We see less child deaths than we used to see 50 years back. But then we also see the population growing, and so we see it from 8 million in 1961 to what it is now at 44 million. And what that puts in terms of pressure, particularly, and you say it, on social services. Look at roads, look at houses, look at health services, look at schools, look at our ability to even get clean water. So these are some of the challenges that are very real. But I think also the fact that we have 7 billion strong means we have 7 billion possibilities to making a difference. So we see it very much as an opportunity for each and every one of us to take an action and to decide today what we want to see as a future for us.
You talked about Tanzanian population growing over the years. Now we're heading for the almost 50 million people. Do you see the economy in Tanzania matching up to the demands of the population?
Well, once again, thank you very much, Frank, for hosting us. The world is changing, as Julita has said. You see there are new economic opportunities, unlike the past, where the world economy and the growth was driven by a few countries, particularly in the West. And that is shifting now. The engines of growth are getting much more dispersed. You have China, you have India, you have countries in South Africa, in Africa in general, that have experienced sustained growth over the last 10, 15 years, which is very good because it's becoming much more equitable in terms of growth, and it's also good, mitigates the risks, and we are looking at some after effects of the financial crisis. And as far as Tanzania is concerned, Tanzania, in terms of the growth rate, has done pretty well in recent times. The growth rate has averaged around 7% per annum, and which got affected, of course, by the economic crisis in 2008, although Africa in general didn't get so affected because of it was not so well integrated in the international financial system. So in a sense, it was a blessing in disguise. But as we go along, I think there was going to be more integration. It is happening at the regional level, it's happening at the global level. So overall, Tanzania has done very well. But the area which has worried policymakers and people in general is that the poverty rates have not gone down as one would have expected. The growth rate has been 7%. The poverty, if you compare from 2000 to 2007, has gone down approximately 2% or even less, which is nothing major. So that has worried policymakers, and one of the factors is that the growth that has taken place in Tanzania is in those sectors where not so many people are employed. For example, if higher growth would have happened in sectors like agriculture, one would probably have seen more poverty reduction. So again, I think the picture, there are lots of positives. Finally, we are seeing sustained growth in Africa, and we hope that will continue, and there would be greater regional cooperation to also fuel the growth. But we are seeing there are some clouds overhanging what is happening in the Eurozone and the US as well.
And Frank, let me come in there, because I think Oasis placed it very well. And one of the things that when we looked at the data from 2000, which he refers to 2007, one does see a slight decrease in poverty levels, and he gave the figure 2.4%. But if one looks at how fast the population was growing, in real terms, in actual numbers, what it signified was 1.3 million additional Tanzanians were poor. And that is really because at this point what is happening is the population growth, which is growing at 2.9% per annum, which is about 1 million new Tanzanians coming into the population, is actually it's going faster than that economic growth. One of the things we have learned globally from the data is for us to really begin to see gains in economic growth and reduction in poverty, one needs to have, for Tanzania, if it's going to continue to grow at 2.9%, at least a sustained economic growth of 9%. So you really have to balance these things out, and this is one of the things we are really working with the government to see how best to look at the rate of population growth and what the demands are, and actually the economic growth.
So what do you do? Do you focus on economic growth, or do you try to control population?
It's interesting because there was a New York Times article today or day before yesterday that talked about it as the pie. Does one increase the pie, which is the economic piece, or does one reduce the forks that eat the pie? Right. Or does one actually change the habits, which is really the way in which we look at things of governance, human rights, dignity of people. And it's very difficult. It's very difficult, and I think this is the balancing act in terms of the whole mix. But I think it can be done, and we've seen examples in Asia where that's happened and where they've been able to make those right sorts of choices. Tanzania itself has a national population policy which looks at these dynamics, and I think what is important is that we move from that policy into actual implementation. And for an issue like population, it's about development, so it requires all the sectors to be working in sync around a national agenda.
You mentioned 2.9% growth rate, annual national growth rate.
Yes.
How is that compared to the world?
Well, the world at this point is growing at 1.2%. So that's a huge difference. I keep on thinking about, Tanzania's fertility. That's the number of women, how number of children a woman will have in her lifetime. In Tanzania, that figure is between 5 and 6. That was what the world's fertility was 50 years ago. So it just shows that we really need to be doing some catching up. At this point, the average woman globally will have 2 children. And in Tanzania, we're having 5 on average. So those are the sorts of trends that we're seeing. So it is quite challenging.
So are you advocating for a change in habit? Should people not have a lot of children? Should people use contraceptives?
I mean, one of the fundamental things the UN looks at is individuals' rights and individuals' choices. And one of the things that we believe is that if an individual is given the right information and the right education, they can make an informed choice about how many children they want. And we see this consistently, even in Tanzania. The 2 variables that help a woman decide how many children she should have or how many children they should have as a couple is actually her educational level and her wealth. So depending on where she is in the wealth quintile, whether she's poor, she will have more children. When she's educated, she has on average 3 children less. And so you see the variables even within Tanzania, where in some areas like Arusha and Kilimanjaro, a woman on average is having 2 children. In Shinyanga, on the other hand, she's having 7. So there's those disparities very much driven by education and wealth. So we are not here to sort of dictate, but what we are saying is that, you know, given certain fundamental human rights and social services, an individual will take the right choice.
Okay.
You know, and I think that's what we want individuals to be responsible about. Because again, I think one of the things that we feel as the world reaches 7 billion is that we are so interconnected. Frank, what I decide today is going to affect whether your kids go to school or, you know. So we're so interconnected as the world that our decisions impact on others. And therefore, we need to be responsible in the sorts of choices that we make.
If you allow me to come in, I mean, in terms of measuring development, one of the indicators that UN commonly uses is the Human Development Index, which is very popular. You see every year that report is launched, global report is launched, and that exactly measures choices. There's one thing of individual making choices, but what about capabilities? And that's where education, that's where health, that's where your ability to have income or assets comes in, because it enhances your capabilities, which in turn helps you to make informed choices. So there's one thing about having freedom to choose, but then you need to have the capabilities. And I think you will see examples from India or Southeast Asia, economic growth or the wealth also had, as well as education, had impact on population rates. Even within a country, India is a very good example. Like in the south, the population growth rate has been relatively lower than in the north because of the research has pointed out it's partly related to the literacy rates and more wealth in those states in southern India. And I think you see it in other countries as well, like Southeast Asia. As they started to grow, people started to accumulate more wealth, population rates also went down.
Okay. One of the focus areas in Tanzania is reproductive health.
Yes.
What kind of programs are you involved in?
Okay. Well, the UN has come a long way in Tanzania. One of the things that we are doing is actually working much more collaborative and coherent in support of government. I mean, we clearly align to what it is that government needs and its strategies, Mukukuta for one, but also in different sectors. And so in the health sector, our support is to what we call the Health Sector Strategic Plan, which is a big program that really looks at a number of elements. One of the areas it has prioritized is women's health and maternal health particularly. And so one of the things we've done with the Tanzanian government, or in support of the Tanzanian government, is at 3 levels, I would say. First and foremost, at the level of policy. And so Tanzania in itself has a number of policies related to reproductive commitment and a target that it needs to reach. And so that's helped us galvanize a number of partners, not just the UN, but also development partners, around what it is Tanzania wants to achieve and how it wants to go about doing that. The second area is clearly in terms of the health system. And the health system has a number of levels. It has the ability, one, for there to be enough health workers, and that those health workers are trained. And Tanzania, unfortunately, at this point, still has a shortage of health workers. We find many times you go into facilities and there's no health worker there, or if she's there, she's not trained correctly, or he's not trained correctly. Or if they're not there, then it's the whole issue of supplies. Do they have the right equipment in place? Are they able to do shifts? One of the areas is the whole aspect of having light and water in facilities to be able to carry out services. So it's as simple as that, but the whole system has to work. And maybe the last thing is really in relation to the people themselves taking ownership of their own health. And this is really where the education and outreach to communities to understand, and particularly women, to understand if she's pregnant, what must she do? If she has a danger sign, where must she go? And so that's where our support is, at those sort of 3 levels. And we're doing it through what we call the UN Development Assistance Plan, which looks at a number of areas, not just health. It looks at economic growth, which is where one of the areas where